Summer 924, somewhere in the North Sea. Where are we going under false colors? Osrith called to her brother, who was at the prow, looking out into the clear day's view. He glanced across to Osrith, who was busy staring at the water at stern of Trinity where she had sat when Domhnall had taken her back to Berwick. She looked at Sparrowhawk, Utad's ship, being sailed by Bergen Sihtric, looked at the sea. She was called Wakilt, the sea goddess. A rescue mission, he called back to Osrith, and to sail in hostile waters. I fly the flag of my enemy to fool my enemy. Osrith turned her head. She should have run, she could have. But she would have left young Finan, and something in her then had told her to stay by her son, stay with him. Not that she had had a lot of time to choose in any case before they were underway, and the deep North Sea beneath them. At least his uncle was intent on being with him, showing him the ship, pointing things out in the horizon. They seemed amiable. Osrith thought her son had spent nearly 4 years, on and off, at Wittenberg. She turned back to the sea and looked at the blue-green, smoothing her hand over her. She had seen his cock before, of course, and it had been on the night she had beaten Domhnall's man, Bryn. He had tried to rape her. She remembered her fear but not his cock. Domhnall had looked back to Trinity several times. Osrith had held up Bué. A reminder, she hoped, that she was his friend, a message that she had not been a part of this. Osrith smoothed her hair. It was shoulder length now, a sign of the gales of a proud warrior. Shorn hair was a sign of punishment. He and Donchada had tried to shame her that way, too. A creak in the planks of the Trinity made Osrith look up. Her brother was standing in her view. You wanted to be one of my men's wives, he told. And they come with us, so you are coming with us. I see no others, Osrith said, sourly. For effect, she looked back to Sparrowhawk, Utad's own ship, and at his warriors, Rorick and Berg, who were yet to be married. Osferth, whose wife, Ingolfrid, had been her other brother's wife. She was not aboard, nor was there sign of Elfberh, Sihtric's wife. Because no others are disobedient like you, he told her. Anger flared in Osrith. Obedient to whom? Finan, as her husband, had given her no other instruction than to visit Bibbenberg, which she had done. It was not as if he lived at Berwick with her. She could count on one hand the times he had spent a reasonable period of time with her at the estate in the last 4 years. How could she have known she would be there at a time the Norse were to attack? Oh, Osrith thought, and narrowed her eyes. He needed a friendly banner to rescue a queen, or so he said. And Constantine was thought to be in alliance with Ethelm. This was no rogue accident. Her brother would have organized it well enough that no crew were lost. And said crew were now with them, sailing Trinity. Edith will be compassionate, Osrith told him. She would not leave a warrior unclad. Utad's face clouded, as had been her intention. Edith will not open my gates to a bastard dog of Constantine's. Except, she may like what she sees. Osrith smiled. And before you get back from your little jaunt to the south coast and the rescue mission for the Queen, Bibbenberg will be a key fortress in King Constantine's restoration of Alba. That got him. Utad looked furious. He looked as if he were about to hit her, but instead, clenched his fists. Sit down and stay silent, he told her, and stalked back to Finan, and young Finan. She had to admit that using Domhnall's banner was making their journey surprisingly uneventful. Ethelm's ships were not harrying their passage, and she looked at their sails, with leaping stag, and wondered whether her brother was right. Had he an arrangement with the Scots to protect their interests in the east as long as it brought Wessex closer to the throne under Elft? Osrith looked back to the sea again. If she was Wakilt, the pagan sea goddess that the Frisians worshipped, could she not control the sea? Could a wave not come over the ship and take him overboard? From the prow, Finan looked back from his wife's face to that of his lord. You can be a bastard sometimes, you know that, Finan told him, which was the nearest his friend ever came to disapproving of him, but there was a flash of pain in his eyes. I need her to be here, you know why, Utad told him. Finan nodded, and fixed to look on his son for a moment. I know why, he told Utad. Osrith did not move from Trinity's stern until the Alba sailors were ready to tie up the ship for the night. It was too light to look at the stars yet, so she looked at the men of the land which had adopted her, bright, rounded, some with fair hair, some with dark back, like Domhnall's and Constantine's and Finan's. All had keen, piercing eyes of people who spent 6 months staring out with the wind whipping around their faces, and those that she made eye contact with, who she had met, in passing, at Dunnottar, gave her small nods of their heads. They trusted her being there, Osrith realized, so she needed to step up for them, which is why she did not run. Instead she sat, still, like a stubborn child who would rather make a point. Eventually, Finan came over and sat down next to her, offering her meat that Osferth and Sihtric had acquired in the little port by where they had moored. "Where are we?" she asked him, giving way, eventually. "An island, off the coast of Sent, called Sheppey," Finan told her. She lowered the meat, and looked out to sea. "I am your wife Finan," she told him, in Gaelish, "and I do not wish to shame you." She turned her head away when he bent to kiss her. Finan got up and moved round to sit on the other side of her, and put his cloak around the two of them, his arms around her waist, where Domhnall had sat, holding her hand a week before. "Shamed me," he repeated. "Uhtred, God knows I love that man. He has shamed himself. I swear I knew nothing of this." But Osrith was unfazed. "And I am not obedient enough, you asso," he assured her. "Where would you go if you left this ship?" "Go back to Berwick," she told him, and then anger compelled her on, and she leaned back from Finan and narrowed her brows. "I never went to Bebbanburg to collect information or indulge in gossip," Osrith went on. "When Constantine asked me to spy at Seaster, I told him I would never use you for information." She made to look away, but Finan pulled her to him. What Osrith wouldn't give for them to be back at the farm, in their bedroom. She still desired Finan, even when her brother had abducted her and stolen Domhnall's ship. "Well, know this," Finan told her. "We are to protect Eadgifu and her 2 children, Edward's children." Osrith turned to him in astonishment. "Uhtred told me not to tell his sister. So I'm telling my wife." 1 foot in, 1 foot out. It had been a story, a legend that young Finan had heard. A nobleman had to tell his king something that the king needed to know, otherwise he would be defeated in battle by his rival. However, his king told him that if he ever set his feet inside his castle, he would be killed. So to give loyalty to his monarch but not cast himself down to death, he only placed 1 foot into the palace. "What do you know of Brehon law?" she continued in Gaelish, noticing the resentful glances that she was getting from her brother. "It's the law," he told her, with a mirthless chuckle. "Were I in Irian, that would be the law I would be obeying. That would be the law I would be upholding if I were king of the Aleid." Osrith smiled. "So, do you know if Brehon law was followed, such as in Cumbraland, or in Deheubarth?" He shook his head. "Monks know that kind of thing." "Monks did," Osrith reassured him, in her own mind. "Why do you want to know?" Osrith leaned forward and pulled from her shirt a piece of paper, the same paper that Edred had given to her. "I cannot read a lot. I don't read Cymric very well," he admitted. Osrith pointed out the letters. "So you have a small piece of land in Cumbraland, because it was your mother's," Finan said, smiling. "It is yours, of course, not Uhtred's. Or Uhtred's because it was once Wigger's, so to speak." He kissed her head. "So you will be leaving Berwick to your other lands?" "If they are mine," Osrith told him. But there was something else. And Osrith told him about her marriage to Guthred, and that, because of this, she could backdate her claim to the land all the way back to Arian. "You have evidence for this?" Finan asked. "Ask any poet to tell you Taliesin," she told him. "I bet our son knows them all." "What?" she asked, for her husband was staring at her with a big smile on his face. "So you are queen of Rush. You told me that once, do you remember?" he said, pulling her to him. "I think so. I always think how you remember everything. You are king of the Aleid. Could there be something in it, what Edra says?" She added. You are not serious?" Finan asked her. "Not serious with only a dozen warriors from Berwick and maybe 24 landsmen to my cause," Osrith said. From the prow, with his warriors having tied Sparrowhawk to Trinity, and climbed over the rails from one to the other, Uhtred called to Finan. He froze. "Go on," Osrith said, moving away from her husband. I will not be accused of coming between the Lord and his Oathman. Finan shook his head. I wish that could. No, Osrith said. You must treat me as if I am a captive, and you are the same as when you ride with Utad. She told him. It is unfair to make him make you choose. And Finan pulled his wife to his chest, and whispered by her ear, You are my prisoner, bound and unable to escape. He told her softly. And you have been a very naughty woman. I am your guard, and I need to punish you. The punishment got as far as pulling her close to him and sliding a hand up her shirt and closing a hand over her breast, his agile fingers finding her nipple. Finan, come on, Utad called. She felt her husband sigh, resignedly. And anyway, there would be no chance for that, Osrith thought, because she was going to escape and she do not want him to have told her the plan. Come on, Utad insisted, waving his closed fist towards his friend. It was a handful of dice. Osrith nodded, and Finan kissed her, and went over to their game, catching one another's eye every so often. Osrith looked up to the stars, making up patterns from them, until she heard the sound of a voice, telling a story. It was young Finan, and he was telling the story of Edwin, king of Dyria, who had made the king of Bernicia, Oswald, and their family, flee to shelter to Iona. He told of Edwin's marriage in Cent, and the stranger who told him of Christianity, who had gone with Edwin to add Geoffrin to convert him on his accession to the joint Northumbrian thrones. Paulinus, the man's name was, and young Finan told of the peace that was in the whole of the land, where a mother and infant could move across it without harm, and where cups had been left out by good, fast-flowing rivers for travellers. Finan sat for some time by his wife's sleeping form, pulling a fleece over her shoulders as he looked across to his son, sitting patiently by his own uncle. He hoped, no, he prayed, that Osrith would forgive them for what they were about to do. Then he rested a tender kiss on her forehead before returning to watch the Alba sailors. 88,888,888. She had been going to Shrine of Saint Bertha but then, by way of accident, ended up there, in a convent, on the island of Sheppey. She was Queen Eadgifu, and the accident was meeting Ethelm's men. They were guarding the convent and were the men of Ethelm Jr., working on behalf of his father. That was the situation. Osrith had learned from Finan, but not the plan. The plan was whatever Utad wanted it to be. In the meantime, Osrith had plenty of time to devise one of her own, more out of amusement than anything else. The red-cloaked men of Ethelm were guarding the convent. They stood in pairs and seemed to change watch every so often. Hourly, Osrith estimated, from the rising of the moon and the movement of the evening star. Glad to be out of the north, she heard one of them say, A plague is in the north. Osrith's heart froze. A plague? Where is the plague? Osrith watched, and realized that the person who had shouted was herself. She was glad she had remembered to effect a Wilton Sir accent. Who goes there? Aldred, Osrith lied, using the name of the West Saxon guard she had once killed. Were you with us at Bibbenberg, at the siege? What siege? Osrith thought. Did he mean when Utad took the fortress? Yes, she called back, vaguely. Lincoln, sir, they told her. Osrith felt herself breathe again. To them, southerners, everywhere was north. But Lincoln, sir, was as far away from Cent as it was from Eothwick, even further away from Berwick. There was more talking, and she heard the guards talk of the Centish rebellion, under Sigulf, Eadgifu's brother, and how Edward had made the decision to give Mercia to Aethelstan, whilst Elf would be king of Cent, East Anglia and Wessex. Stop gossiping and change guard. Osrith heard a commander call. She heard a creak of the planks of Trinity, and looked up, seeing Sihtric glance down to her, and give her a brief smile, before looking back to the nunnery. And now she knew how she would do it, and she would use a trick that Utad had once boasted of using, when he had been in what should have been the privacy of his own house, in Winchester. Osrith had been up on the roof, having run from something or other, or had been following them to look at Finan. She had, ever since she had heard about it, sewn silver pieces into her jerkin seams. While Utad had relieved her of her small purse of silver, making a good show of giving it to Finan. She would be seen, too, of course, but if she got out after Utad had begun his plan, then she'll be able to get away with it. You will stay here, Utad told her, when the sun had risen enough that the time of day could no longer be called night. We are taking the queen and her sons, and we are leaving, he told Osrith, bossily. It was only when he was halfway across the small stretch of water to the jetty of the convent, that Osrith called back, "Bring me back some lavender." "Finan," he declared, turning to his friend. But he shrugged his shoulders, and looked at Osrith. But it had not been Finan who had told her that Iajifu infused lavender oil with lanolin onto her cleavage as a fragrance. Women talk. She called back to her brother. Edith has told me a lot of things. A good deal of a lot of things. It was disappointing that Utad had now rounded a small bend, for she could not tell his reaction. And now she must act, and quickly, if she wanted to get to the convent and to Iajifu before her brother. Osrith called over the Gaelish captain, a man by the name of Sin. "You know me," she told him in Gaelish, and Sin smiled. "Yes," he agreed. "You and Prince Domnall are allies." He smiled at Osrith, and added, "I know some English, and I know that you are in no way involved." "I have told the men." Osrith looked up to the half-dozen Gaels, Picts and Strathclydians, and they nodded to her. "Sin," Osrith asked, "when you were attacked by the Norse ships, can you tell me, did the Norse seem surprised in any way that you were there?" For she had her own hypothesis there, which was confirmed when Sin, after a moment's thought, said, "No, I do not believe they were surprised. They seem to be attacking us for no good reason. The ship, as you can see," he gestured with his hand, "survived, as did we all. And the Lord Utad came out with a boat to drag us all out of the sea. And does it strike you as odd that Norse, who are not famed for their clemency, should fail to destroy either you or your ship?" "Not only that," Sin added, grimly, "that the Lord Utad was so prompt in his rescue. He must have had a man watching out to sea unflinchingly and the boat ready so promptly that he should get to us and we all survive." "Fancy that." Osrith shook her head. "How dare he," she thought, "to save a queen, whose children are babies and are never going to have an impact on the potential ruler of Wessex and the current ruler of Mercia." "What do you need of us, Lady of Berwick?" Sin asked. "I believe you have a plan." "Lord Utad wants to rescue King Edward's wife, Queen Iajifu, and her children," Osrith told him. "He will take them back to Bibbenberg, and to safety. But I want to talk to them first. And I do not want you to get the blame when I go," she added, glancing behind her, to Berg, who was standing stoically in the prow. He was clearly there to watch the crew and her. Just then, a cry went up from one of the sailors. He pointed over the water and became agitated. "What is it they shout about?" Berg demanded of Osrith. "Answer me." Skilligrimson, Osrith thought. Was he as bad as his brother, or as good as his other? Did he know she was Skoll's murderer? "Answer me," he demanded of the Scots, but Osrith told him they did not speak or understand English. "Then you tell me, damned woman," he declared, and Osrith found out then that he did know about Skoll because he hit her in the face. She reeled, but he found his way blocked by Sin. "Do you know the lament of the Cooley Mountains?" Sin asked, in English. "It is a very sad song, one of a traitorous usurper who steals the land from a lord when they are out on a pilgrimage, just as Idjal did." "Idjal?" Osrith echoed, accepting the help of 3 of the crew. They stood in front of her, protectively. "Oh yes," Sin told Osrith. "I know far more English than that fool of a brother, no offense meant," he added, his words dripping with sarcasm. "Ever did think. Did you know that in exchange for Berg here setting up the Norse attack, the land north of his up to King Constantine's border has been given to him?" Osrith stopped, and looked between Berg and Sin, giving an intermittent, stuttering laugh. "The land north of his," Sin told her. "But, that's my land, Berwick. I inherited that land from my husband." "Senidu I Alpin," Sin said. "Gifted to you by King Constantine, gifted to Idjal by Earl Ormond Utad," he added. "And you are here, brought away from your lands while Ijel goes about getting comfortable. Osrith felt herself getting angry. Take her from her land, and give it away? He hadn't known she would be at Bibbenberg, so he would have sent Ijel when she would have been there to defend her home from an attack of hundreds of men with her fledgling standing army of, yes, about 3 dozen. It would be a massacre. Suddenly a sickness came to Osrith's mind. She gave Sin a quick glance, and then said, in Gaelish, "Hold him." And she hit the young Norse warrior hard on the head with the flat of her blade. He staggered, but did not give in. "Now you can help," she told them, and within a minute, Berg was unconscious at the bottom of Trinity. "Get him over to Sparrowhawk," she asked, and 4 of them moved him, a limb each, and tossed him into Utad's ship. "Sin," she told him, "I wish you to go back to Alba, find Domhnall, tell him Trinity is safe. I am going to follow, and take Sparrowhawk after my brother." "But, lady, you can't do it alone. This is a tidal estuary, the ship will be swept out to sea." Sin inhaled. "Let us take you back to your lands, Lord Sainid's lands, where you will be safe amongst your people," he suggested. Oppose this Norseman who had been offered them. But Osrith was far too angry. She could go, be where she wanted to be now, was close to her brother, to humiliate him. Young Finan was with them, too, and she was not about to leave him. "Take the Trinity," Osrith told Sin. "Ask Domhnall to forgive anything on my part. If I may say, you are too willing to accept blame for things that are not your fault, Lady of Berwick. You have given your husband far too easy time when his lord shames you." He shook his head. "If I allowed my wife to be treated in such a manner," then he stopped, and shook his head, for he had seen Osrith's face. Angry, yes. Betrayed, yes. Cheated from the life she had hoped to pursue. All the darning and crochet and needlepoint in the world was not going to persuade Finan more to spend more time with her if he didn't want to. Had she made a mistake? She had accepted he was her brother's man. But, as Sin said, he had stood by now so many times when Utad had treated her badly, that it didn't feel like love, and she couldn't make him love her. "I am going to find the Queen, and find out what is happening here," Osrith told Sin. "I want you to leave this place. You should find yourselves untroubled going north, so long as you fly Domhnall's banner." Sin nodded. "Take care to find your son," he added, as he readied Trinity, and Osrith climbed over into Sparrowhawk, past the still unconscious Berg, and watched as Constantine's flagship sailed away from Sheppey and into the Thames estuary until she could see it no longer. And now, there would be no time to carry out any plan, even if she had even a half-formed one. Osrith waited as the ship drifted north, away from the island before turning the wheel and jamming the rudder. The Norseman was beginning to make some noises in the bottom of the ship, and Osrith glanced at him. Then, she took a pair of oars and guided herself, with a counter-current, into an inlet on the northeastern edge of the island. With effort, she could get close to low, flat rocks. A post driven in between the rocks suggested that fishermen used the place, such as Gert and Dulf, as they traveled around the country selling their catch. Then, she got out, hid and waited. Osrith watched as Utad demanded a search for Trinity and Sparrowhawk, with Sihtric guarding a group of people, presumably Queen Eadgifu, her children and what looked to be a slave girl. Then, when he must have felt time pressing, he looked around for something, anything, he could steal to get them away from the place. Guards of Ethelelm were not chasing them yet, so whatever he had contrived must have worked, for time. Then a shout went up. Sihtric had found Sparrowhawk, and had called Osferth over to the rocks. Berg, who was still mostly unconscious, moved when Sihtric, lithe like a mountain goat, climbed down and shook Berg. "We'll bring her round," Sihtric said, and within minutes, Sparrowhawk was tied up at the quay in front of Utad. Berg, who had got to his feet, had got out of the ship and was explaining to Utad that he must have been ambushed, and Utad muttered that it must have been the Scots. Behind them, however, Eadgifu's escape had been noticed, and Utad and his men were forming a protective arc around the royal family, their backs to them as they began to fight Ethelelm's men. Osrith shook her head as she knew she had been beaten. She could do nothing to prevent Queen Eadgifu from being rescued by Utad, and she turned, wondering now that she hadn't been a little hasty in turning down Scylon's offer to go back to Bibbenberg. She could use the silver to buy some passage north, Osrith considered. Or, whether it was sunlight glinting off a blade or a helmet, or the light on the water in the harbour, Osrith turned back to see the two children being put onto Sparrowhawk, and Queen Niajafu making to climb in. The slave seemed to be helping her, and at turns, looking back to Ethelelm's men and offering animated retorts and rebukes. Now was her chance, and Osrith climbed up over the rocks, and under the quay. Then, she climbed to the side of Sparrowhawk, unhooking the painter line as she did so, until the ship was drifting in the current as she had been not an hour before. 88,888,888 they would be going out to sea, Osrith knew, but it didn't bother her. When she had got far enough away, she could jam the wheel and at least stop the ship ending up in Frisia. And they hadn't yet noticed all that fighting, and they hadn't noticed the treasure in human form that was Queen Niajafu was floating away. Osrith's plan was not this, to get the woman to send and to her brother, who would gladly have his sister back, she presumed, by some crew, and sail back to Berwick. Somehow. What crew would want to do that? Maybe with the promise of the ship, at the end. Sparrowhawk seemed to be drifting diagonally now, heading southeast, with the Isle of Sheppey to their back, the Scent Coast in front of them. She had little time, but she wanted to speak to Niajafu first. An odor of lavender permeated the air, and it was followed by the Queen herself, the so-called Queen, for Wessex did not recognize the title. Presumably Edward had used it as a lubricant in fixing the marriage after Elflad's death. Small and slender, the woman came to the deck and cast her eyes on Osrith. I told all the guards to go away, Niajafu told Osrith, her voice soft, but determined. In her arms, she held one child, a baby, and had a young boy who could walk holding her hand. I'm not a guard. I am here to take you to safety. In the middle distance there was a hammering on the convent door could be heard. Oh, Niajafu said, and in that one expression, she carried disdain, disappointment, but most of all derision. Osrith's anger flared again. So you were Edward's third wife? Osrith shook her head, as if she were the disappointment. I was the wife of King Edward of Wessex, Niajafu replied officiously. I regret I was not there at his passing, Osrith replied. I am not, the woman said. Odious piece of shit. But Osrith said nothing, for she could feel the grief coming, grief born of sentiment of a time long gone, when they were young at the beginning. He was like the younger brother who Osrith had never had, and who had beguiled her into his bed so many times. She pulled out Buade, and drove her into the deck. Who are you? The woman asked. I remember his smile, Osrith said, remembering. I never knew a sunnier child. And then she smiled, and then he stole Ethelflaed's necklace for he, pretending he'd found it, and I made him out it back. She caught him and burned his toy soldier army in the kitchen fireplace. He cried for a week after that, and tears were forming in Osrith's eyes now, as she remembered his face, his joy in life. I will not say it again, Niajafu said, and there was a knife in her hand, but Osrith did not move. Then one day he told me to move from guarding his door to sleep in his bed. I thought. She stopped, and thought. Had she thought instead of him? Or had she always known that he was seducing her? It did not matter. Edward had a charm about him that made everyone think that what it was they were doing for him they were really doing for themselves. He was so happy when he met Ecgwin, so happy when his children were born. There was not a happier father anywhere. And she looked at the young woman's defiant, arrogant face, and let the tears do as they liked. I never loved him, nor him me. But he loved his children, every single one of them. She looked at the child in her arms and at her side. From behind her, a shout had gone up. Someone had noticed Sparrowhawk had gone, and there was now a frantic scramble to retrieve her. If you are here to kill them, then, Niajafu held the flimsy blade out to Osrith again. But flimsy blades could cut sharp and deeply. Why would I wish to kill them? Osrith asked. Why are you here? To piss my brother off, she told her. Utid of Bibbenberg. But I doubt you will know, Osrith, Niajafu said softly, the light in her eyes changing as she said her name. "Yes, I do know you." She glanced to the shore. A boat was now being put out to where Sparrowhawk was. "He remembered you, especially near the end. He said your name. You must have meant a good deal to him, too." She took a step towards Osrith, who had not yet abandoned her senses. This woman had not lowered her blade, and behind her a manner of curses were being thrown towards them. "And you wish to piss your brother off because he's a piece of shit," Osrith told her. "He has stolen my land, and my husband." Although, Osrith admitted, a lot of that was Finan's choice. "I would be helping my people prepare for harvest now, but he stole a ship, and forced me to come with him, to rescue you." "Your people?" "I have land, Beric." There was a pause. Behind them, water lapped of a small boat coming nearer. She would have to release the wheel, and now, if she wanted the current to beat the oars of a rowing boat, she pushed the tiller, and there was a grinding noise. Wakilt, if she needed the power of the goddess now, would take her south. "So, what was your plan to rescue me?" Iajafu asked. "Get you to Scent," she told her. The woman smiled. "A good plan," she told her. "My brother's estate is just over there." She nodded to the coast, where a large settlement rested at the water's edge. "I can help you," she added, as the boat got nearer. Who would he send? Osrith thought. Finan, no doubt.